human beings are like fish in water that don't know we're living in water, and that there's all these other invisible forces moving through the water all the time. And the water is the spiritual world around us. We're embedded in it. And these beings are constantly moving through our energy field and leaving traces of emotional impulses, thought forms, things of that kind, that we have to be clear enough to perceive that, separate it from what we ourselves are generating in our thought field, and decide, do I want to go with that or with this?
Mm-hmm.
And as a person really opens up spiritual perception, this is where the rubber hits the road in real spiritual development. And you start perceiving non-physical beings and understanding the non-physical influences coming in without going off into some state of psychosis. It's got to be held in balance. That at that point, you can then differentiate where's this information and these impulses coming from,
Right.
the different types of beings. So it was understood classically, and then that got lost, that we go through certain stages. The first stage is always mindfulness. It's simply to observe the content of our thoughts that we have, our emotions we have, our will impulses. Mindfulness is always the first stage, so that we become self-aware. And being self-aware, we already start to clean up a lot of our garbage, because once we see it, it's kind of horrific. Like, I can't believe I generated a thought form that negative about that person.
Right.
That's completely destructive.
These are my agreements in fear. These are my,
Yes.
we start to become aware of actually what we're doing. So awareness is,
yes.
And that's also something that John Churchill, again, the Mahayana Buddhist, he was talking about, is that most people think, well, that's the end goal, and actually it is a momentous task to be aware, and there's levels and levels and levels of awareness. So
yes.
It is an ongoing process. So you can put that as like, become more aware, more aware, more aware, but it's actually not the end goal. He was like, that's like the first stage.
That's the beginning.
That's the beginning.
It is. It really is.
That's just where we start.
Yeah.
But most people think, oh yeah, well, that's the goal, awareness. But it's just actually the first stop of the train.
And so, seen from a particular perspective, you develop the mindfulness so that you're aware of your internal content. Then you start to clean it up a bit so that you're resonating at a higher level and more productive. But then you become aware of what's inside of your present personality. That then, as you do the vision of the eagle and you begin to see this is a bead on a chain of multiple lifetimes, you then become more aware of your permanent personality. And then this helps you to understand what thoughts, feelings, etc. you're self-generating versus those coming in from the outside. And then at that point, you start to perceive, you can, in a healthy way, perceive non-physical beings and influences and start to have some discernment about what's the nature of the influences coming in. Because the average person who doesn't do any mindfulness, they are not aware of these influences coming in from the outside at all. They just think it's part of their own internal dialogue, if they're even conscious of it, and it doesn't go just straight to the subconscious. Mm-hmm. In the Rosicrucian tradition, there is a particular exercise or practice that's known as the 6 essential exercises. And it's basically taking mindfulness to its full extent. They say that if a person does this series of practices, then they will be safeguarded against detrimental effects of all kinds of things in the world. It's really the foundation of everything. So the first 3 practices are to observe the content in your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and then to illuminate what it is so that you can direct your thoughts, feelings, and actions in the best way possible. So first you observe what's there without trying to change it. Just see what you're actually generating, and then you're consciously choosing the higher level thought forms, the higher level emotions, the higher level actions in the world in a fully conscious way. So it's mindfulness taken to a full extent. Then the next practice is one of positivity. No matter how bad things look in your life or the world around you, to look for the positive hidden in it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Rosicrucians give one example of this. There's a Persian legend of the Christ, where the Christ is walking with a group of disciples past a dead dog, and the dog is rotted and smells, and there's maggots crawling in it. And all of the disciples turn away in disgust. And the Christ looks at it as they walk by, turns to the disciples and smiles and says, "What beautiful teeth that animal had." It's like always looking for the positive in anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next exercise is radical openness to new perspectives, radical openness to new information, radical openness to new ways of living and being. And then the 6th and final exercise of it is to harmonize all that together in your daily life. So you've got illuminated mind, illuminated heart, illuminated will, positivity, openness to new things, new ways, so you don't get caught in the old traps.
Illuminated will, I don't think we fully expounded upon that.
Okay. So just like you can, in a clear mind state, observe the thoughts you're generating or the emotions you're generating, you can observe the impulses to the actions you take in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So before you take any action, if you really observe yourself internally, you'll see that there's an impulse toward that action. And some of these actions may be detrimental actions, like everybody that ends up in prison. People that end up in prison have particular problems in impulse control. If they were able to perceive inside themselves the impulse before they took the action, they could choose and say, well, that's not the action I want to be taking.
And
right
the
now.
awareness of the source of the impulse.
Exactly.
And this is in the Kabbalist lineage that I'm studying, and this is what we call the process of Berur, which is the process of the clarification of your desire.
Yes.
To understand what is driving what you want.
Yes.
And then ultimately the goal is that what's driving what you want is that Christ's archetype of the being that's in balance, that's actually one with the will of the universe. So you try to clarify your desire so that your desire is ontically identical, or as close to identical as possible, with the will of the universe as expressed through you as a unique incarnation of, the unique self of the being of the one, right? So the berur is the awareness and clarification of your desire until what you want is what God wants, and what God wants is what you want.
Yes.
And then you're really in flow of the universe. It's like this infinity loop of like, all right, what I want is what God wants. What God wants is what I want. And then that's when you're in berur, you're in the clarification of your desire.
Yes.
And you've merged with the will of the universe.
And at that point, you've got the prerequisite to do true divine tantra and things of that kind, that not only are you maximizing your ability for the greatest level of pleasure, joy, etc. in sex, but also focusing on maximizing that in your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, having as the focal goal, the returning to the unity state, that both of you are in such an elevated state, you're both so happy, you're both so joyful, you're both so open, that at that point, there's no shields in place, and the merger to become one and to connect back to the divine, and then becomes possible. Now, I want to bring out one other hidden thing about these 6 exercises that it's not always immediately obvious, but in doing these 6 exercises, we think of them as things you're doing in your consciousness, but everything you do in your consciousness is structuring your energy body.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do those 6 exercises, the way it's described by the Rosicrucians is that your heart is a 12-petal lotus, like they talk about in India. The 6 of the petals of your 12-petal lotus, they say, were developed in earlier times of human evolution. We have to work on another 6 petals to complete the process in this time period. So each one of those 6 exercises I just described develop one of the 6 remaining lotus petals. Once those 6 remaining lotus petals are developed, all 12 lotus petals of the heart become active. At that point, the heart becomes a fully active center for the entire energy body, and it becomes the organizing center for the entire human body of energy for a higher alchemical process to take place.
Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe, follow me at Aubrey Marcus, check out the Aubrey Marcus Podcast, available everywhere, and leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.